welcome to a Fun Day Friday Comic Day, and we are taking a look at comics and comic art and comic stuff, and we are looking at it in up to, but no more than 5, because I love comics, I love art, and I love random limitations on numbers. And so what we're looking at today is, I've picked up a few of these over the last several months. If you've never been, or you live in an area where they don't have these, there's a store called Ollie's Discount Warehouse, and it is delightfully wildly absurd. And they sell, I don't know if they have overstock in things, but they have just about everything. You want, Marvel Legends figures, they have them. You want coffee pods, they have them. You want books, they have them. Groceries, they have them. Pet supplies. You want comic books, they have them. They've got tons of graphic novels. One time I literally saw they had a big display of dehumidifiers with a sign on them that said, "These don't work." And they were on sale. I love the ridiculousness of the store, and so it's a perfect way to try something, or just to do like a random grab bag of something new. And so they have these comic book super value 5-packs, which if you're going to be the host of a show called The Fives Guy, pre-made 5-packs where you can only see the front one and the back one, that's perfect. And I'm also generally broke, and so these were $5.99 a piece. And so it's just over $1 a book. It's like $1.20. It's given me flashbacks to my childhood when comic books could be bought on sort of the amount you save from not spending your full lunch money. And so I'm kind of loving the whole concept of these. And so I have not cracked any of them. I don't know what's in any of them. And so let's go ahead and fire them up and get these open. If I can actually get it open. Thank goodness for editing, because otherwise you'd have had to sit there and watch me for several minutes trying to open this packaging. And so I didn't make you watch me sit there and then eventually get up and get a knife from the kitchen. But we have finally gotten this open. I grabbed these at random. We've got, on the one side from what was visible, we have Dawn of DC, Batman and Robin. And then on the other side, from Boom Studios, we have something called Firefly, which I have personally never heard of. And so let's take a look at what we have here, and we'll see if any of it's solid. And so we have, as I said, Dawn of DC, Batman and Robin. We have Firefly number 27 by Greg Pak, Ethan Young, and Joanna LaFuente. We have, epic! The Adventures of Archer and Armstrong, which was one of my... I was not huge into Valiant back in the day, but like my big 2 titles were Hardcore and Archer and Armstrong. Like, I am so excited to see this title in here. Going along with the Valiant vibe, we have Ninjak, which I believe was one of the first titles that Joe Quesada was on. It was the original Ninjak. This is obviously the updated version. Valiant has a wild history of in recent years. Like, I know that some fans bought it at auction, I think, and I don't know if it's still going, but I love the whole idea that like fans bought it and brought the company back. And then the last one, and this is an odd one, like the cover is in, like the texture of it's different. It's in like newsprint, much thinner. It's called Planet Death, which is super chipper. And so what we are going to do with these 5 is I am going to go ahead and do a time lapse, which basically means I'm gonna do some time and do some research and read the books, and then come back afterwards and talk about what the books were like and what I was able to find out about them. And so let's go ahead and do ourselves a quick time lapse. And we'll time lapse with some old school Spidey and his amazing friends scene transitions. So, all right, let's take a look at what we got in this Ollie's 5-pack. We did a quick research pause so I could take a look at what we had, and we ended up with 5 kind of bangers. And I'm just going to kind of go through and chat a little bit about what I noticed in each one. We're going to start with The Adventures of Archer and Armstrong number 3 from New Valiant. This was published in May of 2016. It was written by Rafer Roberts. It had David LaFuente on pencils, Ryan Wynn on inks, and Brian Reber on colors. And looking into it, the original Valiant was formed by Jim Shooter and had a mix of new characters and old characters from Dell and Gold Key, like Solar, Magnus, and Turok Dinosaur Hunter. I remember as a kid, Harbinger was huge. The first real chase book I remember people on the hunt for was Harbinger #1 when I was a little kid, and that was the book that nobody could find, and people were paying obscene amounts of money for from the mindset of someone who was like 10, 11 years old. And that and New Mutants #87, I remember being the two big books that everyone was on the hunt for. As a kid, I remember that I liked titles like Rye and Magnus, and Bloodshot was interesting. But my two favorite Valiant titles were Hardcore. I wish we got an updated Hardcore in this 5-pack, and Archer and Armstrong. And Archer and Armstrong sort of tied into my appreciation for the zany and the wacky. It just had that tone, both in the visuals and in the storytelling. It's one of my favorite books as a little kid was the Lewis Sacker Wayside School books, and I felt like Archer and Armstrong had a similar sort of zany vibe to it. And so my initial thoughts on Archer and Armstrong #3, the updated version from New Valiant, which came out now 10 years ago, is that it wasn't really for me. It's not that it was bad. It couldn't recapture what I really loved about the old one. The art was really solid, but the magic of what made me love these characters just wasn't there. The dialogue for most of the characters sounded exactly the same to me. And you had the basic plot point. You had Aram and Obadiah Archer. The villain was Bacchus, the mythological god of wine, I'm assuming. And Archer now has a stepsister, Mary Maria, the head of a group of nun assassins named the Sisters of Perpetual Darkness. And Archer seemed like he had a crush on his stepsister, which... okay. Armstrong had a magic satchel that they actually go into in order to find some things, and I'm reading this, and my initial reaction is, what in the name of Hermione Granger's purse even is going on right now? The Archer spends most of the issue sort of drunk and vomiting, which puts him really out of character, and so to be fair, I don't know if I would have liked other issues of this, or if the other issues would have felt more in character, because the vast majority of this issue, Archer is drunk, and it really felt like it felt more like Ren and Stimpy in places than Archer and Armstrong, and just in terms of the vibe and the humor, it was ridiculous rather than sort of offbeat, if that makes sense. In terms of the bad, there was one page in particular, like Bacchus hosts basically a frat party. Like this page in particular is giving Ren and Stimpy, the vomit page. Fridging heck, tastes like butt. These are things that old school Archer and Armstrong, these are things that would not come out of Obadiah Archer's mouth. He does mention that he's been sort of having an online relationship with Faith, and I'm wondering if that's Zeppelin from Harbinger. So I'm a little curious about how this new interpretation of the Valiant Universe is kind of coming to play. That said, there were some flashes of the old magic, almost all of which happened after Archer sobered up in the last 4 pages or so of this issue. And so it's really from here on that Archer sort of sounds like old school Archer. The dialogue between the two leads here is more quirky than ridiculous, and I'm kind of digging it. So just as a case in point, we have when Archer's talking about how he's been chatting with someone online, and Armstrong says, "Is that what you were doing? I thought you discovered porn." And Archer says, "To be fair, I'm not sure if she's my girlfriend exactly. I mean, we've been talking a lot, but..." And then it kind of moves on from there. And so it's that sort of vibe where you've got Archer being oblivious to everyday things in the real world, and Armstrong being oblivious to Archer's obliviousness. That was giving some throwback to the old school Archer and Armstrong. And so there are bits in this issue that did recapture some of that old school magic. Visually, while it's not an art style that I tend to gravitate towards generally, LaFuente's art was fun. It was distinct. For me, comic art is the same as a musician. I love musicians where you hear like 3 or 4 notes, you know exactly who that is. They don't sound like anybody else. LaFuente's art has that very recognizable kind of vibe to it. And so even though it's not my usual cup of tea, it's definitely the kind of art that I think if I were reading it in a series, I would grow to love just because of how distinctive it is. And I have to give him a shout out just for the most creative use of a red Solo cup that I think I've ever seen in my life. Also that bottle that's in the same panel is not saying much about the gentleman wearing the bottle in that same panel. And so final distribution, this is not really going to go into my personal collection. I'm not really sold enough on it to go seek out the rest of this series. I think if I stumbled across more of them in these 5-packs, because I've got a few more ready to roll, I could see myself being sold on it, but not right yet. It's also not particularly suitable for the age range of the kids to whom I'm going to be gifting most of the comics or cards that I review. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a Five Guys freebie box on campus at the college where I work, and basically have it go into the free to college students at my current job pile. And so that's going to go there, which brings us to the second book. Dawn of DC, Batman and Robin, issue number 2, published in October of 2023. It was written by Joshua Williamson and has pencils by Simone DeMeo, and inks by Simone DeMeo, and colors by Simone DeMeo. And I read that, and my first thought was, is this common? It's been a hot minute since I think I've seen anybody in the comic art world that did all the things for their own work. And to be fair, like, most of my comics knowledge is throwback. And so I don't know if that's more common now with the rise. I don't know if this is digital art. Oh, sorry, I accidentally just bumped into the dog who was setting up shop underneath the table. I don't know if that's more common now or if DeMeo is just a total badass. Read the book. I've got to say, generally, sorry, I bumped the camera. Generally, DC kind of frustrates me. I do like a lot of the characters that DC has. I love the work of a lot of their creators. But DC as a company, and this is the reason I was always more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy, even though so many DC characters tried to pull me in, seems like DC likes to throw all their characters into the continuity blender every few years so that characters I thought I knew suddenly don't even resemble themselves. And so I've always loved, like, the Tim Drake Robin and Batman and the Outsiders. I loved the Paul Pelletier, Mike W. Barr Outsider series back in the day. Always loved characters like Halo and Katana and Metamorpho. Like, there's a lot of love for DC characters, but it seems like every time I pick up a different series with a character that I love, I'm like, who is this? And so that's I've always had trouble getting into DC because of that. Having said that, on the whole, about this book individually, I really enjoyed this book. The art was gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Like, I was blown away by the artwork in this book. And on top of that, I recognized the name of the writer immediately, because Joshua Williamson came to my attention about a year ago, also from an Ollie's run, actually. I was on Ollie's and I saw a trade paperback of a series called Birthright, and it just sounded really interesting, and I picked it up. It was like volume 4, and over the last year or so, I slowly but surely got all of the other 9 volumes. So I now have all 10 volumes, and just the plotting and the character development was it was giving me that same warm vibe of the comics I remember as a kid, where you had writers like Fabian Nicieza that did that sort of deep, nuanced, long-term plotting. And I loved every page of that book. It's going to be a video on this channel at some point sooner rather than later. And so when I saw Josh Williamson was the writer, I got excited because I know I enjoy his writing. And then that paired with this absolutely gorgeous artwork has sort of an anime vibe to it, like anime/animation vibe to it, which I love both of those things. And so the prologue, on the whole, I really enjoyed the book. The art was gorgeous. Williamson's strengths shine through in this concept where the book seems like it's focused on the strained father-son dynamic between Bruce Wayne and Damian. The prologue was perfect. I usually don't care about Damian. Damian Wayne is a character I have never had huge amounts of love for. To me, he's almost always depicted as all edge and no substance. And seeing a moment that quashed his emotions by the League of Assassins was such a great tone setter in the prologue of this book, where they let him get attached to the Bat and then kill the Bat in front of him, and tell him it was because he was weak and he was too emotional in terms of his connection to it. That was such a great tone setter for this book. It made me give a crap about Damian, which no one has been able to do thus far. I don't hate the character. I get into characterization, not character beats, and so could not have been better with the prologue. This character Shush, from what I understand, is new. I think this might be the first appearance of Shush, and the idea of engineering. So Shush, at first, I'm like, it's kind of derivative. You've got that Batman villain Hush from a few years back. And I wasn't sure what I thought of the villain, but the villain's plot, engineering a serum to make Gotham's bats attack Batman, was a great story element. It's taking one of Batman's strengths and turning it into one of Batman's weaknesses. And so I loved that whole concept, even if I wasn't initially sold on the villain themselves, just based on the name. Some weird things. Bruce Wayne seems to be broke in this issue. This is just a couple years ago, so I don't know if Bruce Wayne is still poor or poor for Bruce Wayne. I tried Googling a little bit. Seems like it has something to do with the Joker. The Joker made Batman poor. I get the vibe they're going for, that it's getting Batman back to basics. To me, it's a little artificial. It's almost like trying to get Spider-Man back to basics by having him do the deal with Mephisto, and I'm like, But I'm on board for that. It's not as egregious as that in my view. My understanding is that Alfred has died, and there were a couple of elements of that where Damian had that nice bonding moment where he filled the emptiness by stitching up his father's wound and mentioning he learned how to do that from Alfred. And so you've got this sort of uncomfortable relationship, but it's being bridged even by the absence of Alfred. Like, Alfred is still there even when he's not there. I should be aware of both cameras here and like flipping to the pages. I love the bit where Damian goes to school. There was a panel early on about the bath bomb that Bruce created based on something his mother used to keep around the house to ward off bats, and having Batman keep something in a pouch that he would almost never use. That's classic Batman. Having Bruce keep something in his utility belt that he'd almost never use because it reminds him of his mother. That's playing 3D chess character. Like, that is the kind of thing I love about the writing of Joshua Williamson, because he's really thinking about these as three-dimensional characters and coming up with interesting new ways in characters that are nearly 100 years old to do fun and interesting things with them. All of these little familial moments are fantastic, and those are exactly what made Williamson stand out so much in Birthright. He excels in depicting authentic familial interaction, both awkward and strained and loving, and he hits all the emotional beats, which I love. Damian at school, those pages were fantastic. The whole tone changed, which I love about a Batman book, where you've got the tone of the job and the tone of the secret identity of the civilian life. The whole sequence was sort of reminding me of Edward Elric in Full Metal Alchemist, where Damian's getting poked fun at for being short, and so my understanding is that I guess the character where they've added some characterization to Damian is to make him sensitive about his height, particularly since John Kent, I guess, was aged up and is now taller. And so Damian is also very good at sort of giving those anime protagonist poses throughout, which just fits so well with DeMeo's artwork. It really does feel like an anime series or a manga. And the last page of that section, where Damian jumps from the window, is just absolutely gorgeous. It's this page here where he's bounding right out of the panel into the world of the reader, and then we get the transition, the segue, and even these 2 pages, you can see the tone shift, and this is all DeMeo because he's on pencils, inks, and color, and so he's creating that tone shift with his color choices and his color palette as well. It's almost giving like Heatmonger and cold the claymation hot and cold clay puppets from that holiday special. I'll put them up on the screen. We'll have some fun with that. But that last page where Damien jumps out of the window and that transition into this new villain called the White Rabbit, I think her name is, all very, very interesting. It just works so perfectly with the plot, and looking at how the shadows. Where was I looking? There's I'd written down a note about how the shadows of Bruce and Damien when the alarm for White Rabbit's attack goes off is understated, but works so perfectly with the plot because Damien and Bruce both have the same idea of going in to interrogate the White Rabbit. And then we have this tiny little panel here in the middle of the page. And I absolutely loved what they did with the shadows, if you can see them, where Damien is clearly shorter than his father, but he casts a shadow the same height. And I don't see that as a mistake. I see that as something very deliberate because he's already sort of stepping into to being on a different level than previous Robins. He feels more like an equal to Batman than Tim Drake or Dick Grayson when he was Robin, and definitely Jason Todd ever. They were always like the partner, the junior partner. Damien in this issue feels more like an equal, a less mature equal, but more like an equal in this Batman-Robin dynamic, and that's something different. That's something beyond just edgy with no substance, which is my main complaint about Damien in previous versions of the character that I've seen. We meet a character named Mistress Harsh from the prologue. I'm wondering if she is clearly connected to Shush, because she has that line here where she says too slow, and that's a callback to the prologue scene where Damien doesn't stop her from killing the bat. And so it's clear that this is a villain that seems designed to force character development from a character I usually dismiss as a one-note disappointment in Damien, and I'm definitely here for it. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed Dawn of DC Batman and Robin #2. Loved the artwork, loved the writing. Final distribution. This one, as much as I enjoyed it, I will probably try and pick up a trade paperback of this run when it gets released, because I don't really keep a lot of floppies in my personal collection, unless they've got a long-standing emotional attachment. And so I will likely get the trade paperback of this for my PC, and in the interim, this one is going into the pile that will be given to one of my friend's kids, because I might actually go out and pick up additional issues to get the whole first full story arc, because this is the kind of comic, between the character-focused writing, the gorgeous artwork, this is the kind of thing that really hooks kids into the real joy of comics. And I think that this is the kind of book that might do for them what books like Darkhawk and the New Warriors did for me at 10 years old. And so I might pick up the rest of this initial storyline and then gift it to one of the kids of one of my friends. And so that's going into the giving it to the kids pile. Book 3 of 5, we have Ninjak 17. This is another new Valiant book. It was published in July 2016. The writer was Matt Kindt, or Matt Kindt, I'm not sure how you're pronouncing that, Kindt. The artists on the book were Diego Bernard and Alison Rodriguez. Colorists were Ulysses Areola and Andrew Dalhouse. And the cover artist was, this one took a second because there were several different cover artists, and I wanted to make sure I figured out who it was. The cover artist was Diego Latorre, and I wanted to find out who it was because this cover, it was absolutely gorgeous. The reflection, first off, the pose and the facial expression on Ninjak's face, and the sword from the side angle reflecting the charging groups of marauders there. Absolutely gorgeous. He's got some Nightwing-esque cake going on there. But I wanted to make sure I knew who the cover artist was so I could make sure to give them name credit, because the cover is just absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. I did, at one point in time, have a couple of issues of Ninjak. I never super got into it. Ninjak always reminded me of sort of, Ninja Gaiden meets James Bond. And this version of the character really leans into that James Bond side of it. I never really got into James Bond. Like, I played a couple of the video games, Agent Under Fire for PS2 and GoldenEye for Nintendo 64. I don't think I've ever seen a James Bond movie or read a James Bond novel. It's never been my thing. It's not that it's bad, it's just not my vibe. And so I knew a little about the character. I know I had the old Valiant first issue with the foil cover and the Joe Quesada art. And so the basic plot that we have here is Colin King is now an MI6 agent, and we see Colin King's old flame, also his MI6 trainer, Angela Alcott, now named Roku. We see a villain named the Undead Monk, who seems kind of derivative of Ra's al Ghul, if I'm being honest here. And then you have the Shadow 7, who has one mystery member, who is the last of the undead monk folks to survive, and because Ninjak has since taken out 5 of the 7, all but Roku and the mystery person are dead, and we find out that Ninjak's real father was Elaine, the butler for his family, who also raised him. We also find out that Roku has killed Ninjak's parents, which is weirdly shown in this end credit scene, where we already found out that she killed his parents and he didn't care. But then we get this little post-credit scene after the main action of the issue, where we see why his parents, his mother and his stepfather, I guess, fled and left him to be raised by the butler / his bio dad. And then they encounter Roku, who then kills them. I don't know why that was done that way, if I'm being honest. It's a little bit odd to me. Granted, this is issue 17, and so I'm stepping into the middle of it. I'm not entirely sure what's going on in this meeting between Ninjak and this woman at the diner. I'm guessing she's the mystery 7th member of the Shadow 7, who he has not identified yet. Just it's giving that energy. And I think the part of this issue I enjoyed the most, because this is an issue where there was so much going on. I felt like I fell into the middle of a story where I needed more information to really have a sense as to what was going on, because all of it felt a bit too much, a bit too quickly. But again, that's almost to be expected when you jump in with issue 17. You're in the middle of a storyline. And so I'm not entirely sure what's going on. I did really enjoy this bit after the big conflict with Roku having rage about Master Dark and Master Dark's connection, because that's a character I do remember from Valiant, old school Valiant. So yeah, the post-conflict scenes were really the most interesting to me. We have an advertisement, actually, was one of the most interesting things here. I had a note of looking at this advertisement for a series called Britannia, and this thing is pure nightmare fuel in the best possible way. It kind of reminds me of a theater poster, more so than a comic book cover. And the character here in the middle, I have no idea who they're supposed to be, but just the way the artwork is done, it reminds me of the Cro-Mags from the old sci-fi show Sliders. It reminds me of that villainous race, the Cro-Mags, from that series. The prequel that happened at the end, the killing of King's parents, I'm wondering if Roku could somehow, because there's got to be a reason to include that. They show Colin King's parents committing a murder, and then it moves forward. And so I'm wondering, we do see that there's a character who was like a red-haired character, the daughter of this family that was murdered by Ninjak's parents. I'm wondering if Roku might somehow be the red-haired daughter of that member of parliament. It feels like that story had too much detail to just be an illustrated version of information that we were already exposed to earlier in the story. And so, yeah, the artwork was fantastic. I loved the cover. The cover was worth the price of admission alone. I felt a little bit lost The fact that it's an issue 17 means that it would likely be a big investment to get the issues to get up to that point. So for final distribution, this one's probably a bit too violent for my friend's kids. So this is another one. Apparently all the Valiant stuff is going together. It's going to go to the free to the college students at the school where I teach pile. And so I will say that I enjoyed this more than I thought that I would. I'm not, like I said, I'm not usually into the spy thriller genre. But I didn't hate it. And the art was very, very, particularly the cover, was absolutely gorgeous. And so it's definitely a good comic, even if it wasn't precisely the kind of thing that I would find myself getting into. 4 out of 5. The fourth issue out of the 5 in the 5-pack, we have Planet Death Zero. I wasn't sure what to expect of this one. I'd never heard of Planet Death. I'd never heard of Bad Idea Comics. The cover and everything felt like it was made out of newsprint rather than the kind of glossy material that most comics are printed on now. And so to me, it was sort of my first impression of it, not knowing anything about it, was that it was a super cheapy item that was thrown into a lot of these in order to keep the cost down to improve their profit margin. I was right and wrong, I think. And I'll tell you why. This is from Bad Idea Comics. The writers were Derek Kolstad and Robert Venditti. Art was by Tomas Giarello, and the colors were by Dave Stewart. I had never heard of Derek Kolstad, but he is the writer behind the John Wick movies, and so not hearing about him is a me problem, not a Kolstad problem. And the title apparently sold more than 655,000 copies, setting a record, or setting a mark for an indie comic that had not been beat since Wildcats in 1992 with the initial Image boom. And so I don't know how I had never heard of this, because it seems like it's a pretty big deal. And so in doing some of that background research, I also found out that this was a free comic book day issue, which I, again, was like, okay, Ollies, I see what you're doing here, bumping that profit margin, but good Lord, did this book land a lot of awesome in a handful of pages. It was only about 20 pages long. The story echoes some of my favorite books by Timothy Zahn, the sci-fi writer. His series, like his book series Cobra, his series his Conquerors trilogy of novels with the shifting point of view. I love how it presented the narratives pre-battle of both sides of this battle, and finishes with sort of a cliffhanger of the battle beginning. And so it opens with the first off, the artwork is insane. The colors are gorgeous. I get the newsprint nostalgia vibe, which is apparently why they made this decision. I would have loved to see these colors pop even more on some of the glossy paper of more modern comics. But they sort of lead, the first half of this issue is this captured soldier telling the aliens on this planet, you don't know what's coming for you. You were barely able to take me, and there's a whole platoon coming for you. And so the first half of the comic shows that point of view of the expectation of the battle to come. The second half of the comic is this group of aliens saying, no, you don't know what's to come. We're going to slaughter every last person. And they're basically, it was almost like a sci-fi equivalent of a professional wrestling promo where they're both talking trash. And then it ends with the start of the battle, and you don't know which side was right. And on top of that, it's not super clear. Like, they're kind of bioengineering these soldiers, and so yes, the soldiers are the humans, and the aliens on the planet are aliens, but I'm not even sure at the end of this issue number 0, this 20-page bit, I'm not sure who the good guys are, or if it's even that simple of having protagonists and antagonists, or if there's some shades of gray throughout. And so this was an amazing, I loved the story, I loved how it presented both sides of this sort of pre-battle bragging and the cliffhanger. I'm not entirely sure yet what I think of the throwback to newsprint. I was a little bit put off by the oversell on the last page. Let me cue that up here. There was a bit on the last page where it's going into what Planet Death is right here. And it's just the language from Bad Idea here. They're not so humble bragging about how this is the story that's going to change the industry. And to be fair, they sold close to 700,000 copies. So they were right, but just the over-the-top overselling of it just didn't... I mean, the quality of the book spoke for itself. And the over-the-top tone of this is how awesome we are just didn't really sit right with me. But regardless, the art was gorgeous, the story was clever and engaging and left me wanting more. I want to start with the cover because I love the point of view where it's sort of going to the right. It's reminding me of classic side-scrolling video game energy where it's going left to right rather than like jumping right out at you the way a lot of comic covers do now. And so it avoids that sort of now trope of the coming right at you. The colors are subdued but detailed. It's dark and it feels like the expectation of a battlefield, but all the details are there. And literally in my notes for this, one of the things I wrote was take notes Game of Thrones Battle with the Dead episode, because that was dark but you couldn't see anything. This was dark and subdued, but all the details are there. Like you could spend this is the closest I can come up with for a similarity is the first time Kid Me read Darkhawk #1, because it had that sort of gothic vibe to it, that sort of noir vibe to it with Mike Manley's pencils, and Kid Me got lost, just staring at every detail of the artwork in that issue. This is the same thing. You could spend an hour going through all the details on each page and still not catch everything. And so the details were just amazing. The interior pages it kind of reminded me of the vibe of Stranger Things a little bit, where not in the plot at all or the genre or anything like that, but in the way that so much of the visual elements of this book felt familiar. I have no idea of knowing how much any of this was intentional or just my pop culture free association brain doing what it does, but I'm looking at some of these panels and I'm like, all right, this Rocky First Blood Part 2, where he's being pulled out of the mud pit with the leeches. The second page. This character here is screaming the characters from Transformers the Animated Movie, where they were judging characters before dropping them to their death with the Sharkticons. The third page is giving The Matrix, where they wake up from the pod, when Neo wakes up in the pod. The fourth and fifth page double spread is doing double duty, because on the one hand, it's also reminding me of The Matrix, but it's also reminding me of those interior shots inside Unicron in Transformers the Animated Movie. And just, again, looking at the detail on this was not a book done quickly. And that's perfectly okay if it's going to look this gorgeous. And so, yeah, I spent more time looking at this book than any of the other four, and it was half the length. And so it's also, just in terms of plot and vibe, it's kind of reminding me a little bit of Strikeforce Morituri, but on a larger, darker scale. And so final distribution, this one is staying with me. I've seen that they've released 2 very large volumes of this since issue 0, and they have been ordered. I'm going to pick them up when I am next back in Rochester. I'm going to make sure I can pick them up from the local comic shop rather than online retailers like Amazon. It reminds me of that amazing Star Trek Voyager episode where a beacon made all the characters mentally experience this pointless war that nearly destroyed a planet they were passing. Voyager had a couple of episodes like that where the villain was the senselessness of war itself. And I'm getting that energy from this book, and I want to see where it goes. This is one that's going into the PC, at least for right now, until I pick up the whole story and see what ultimately comes of it, because I need to know what happens. So this one is staying with me. Which leaves us with one last issue to wrap up this video, and it's Firefly issue 27. When I recorded the intro, I admit to completely not even realizing that this is Firefly as in the TV series. It's from Boom Comics, written by Greg Pak, and art by Ethan Young, colors by Joanna LaFuente. And it's kind of strange. This is a little bit tough. It's an issue 27 in a larger fictional universe that includes a TV series, a film, and years of comics telling this story, and I don't know these characters. It's everyone tells me that I would love Firefly, and I love pretty much everything Nathan Fillion does. I've never seen it. It's been on the to-watch pile for ages, and so I literally, this was the first actual thing in the Firefly universe that I have ever consumed, which made it a little bit difficult to follow along. I don't know these characters. That said, I did love the artwork. Ethan Young and Joanna LaFuente did an amazing, very minimalist job on the cover in particular. There's an outstanding use of empty space, and I love the juxtaposition of the farm, the very simple farm, with the spaceship landing in the background, and then the two celestial spheres. I don't know if it's the sun and the moon or two moons. I'm not sure what it is in the sky, but it's that kind of conflation of sort of the old Southern Gothic vibe of the simple farmstead with the sci-fi vibe, and having them coexist in a way that feels massive and minimal at the same time. It's a much more complicated cover than the simplicity would make it seem, and that's just gorgeous artwork, well-executed artwork. It's a very human story of grief and a character processing that grief, and it's also a story about a man and his alien wolf dog, which is always going to sell well with me. I think this is the Nathan Fillion character, and there's a space wolf, space puppy that wants to be friends. And initially, Fillion's like, nope, nope, nope. And then they become besties, which, yes, I am here for all of that. Oddly, the synopsis of Firefly on the inside cover here may have been my favorite part. Like I said, I've heard Firefly referred to as a space western before, and I love western films. I love sci-fi. But it's always sort of been in a pretty much permanent spot of, yeah, I'll watch this one day. The synopsis here was phenomenal in breaking down the premise of this fictional world in a way that goes beyond the buzzword of space western. And I feel like I'm more likely to watch Firefly now. I'll probably end up doing a series of videos when I finally get around to doing that. But yeah, it's a very low key. It's an issue 27. Like I said, I don't know the characters. I don't know what caused the trauma. I know the trauma is there, and I know that I can recognize the very human elements of that trauma and how he's processing it. But yeah, it's ultimately final distribution. I'm gonna hold on to this issue. Actually, the battery on my Sony camera, my overshot camera, died seconds before I was ready to end this video. So yeah, sorry for that quick little delay. But yeah, the final distribution, for now, I'm going to hold on to this issue. It's a bit heavy for my friends' kids. It's a more adult concept of dealing with grief. And I kind of want to go watch Firefly and then come back to this issue to see if it hits a little bit different. And so it's not going to really... It's not like Planet Death, where I can see it having a permanent spot in the PC. It will likely at some point get sent out into the world for someone else to enjoy. But for right now, I want to see if this book hits differently after I'm more familiar with these characters in this fictional world. And so this is getting a temporary spot in the PC. And that is where we've taken us. Out of our first 5-pack from Ollie's Discount Warehouse, we've got one issue that's going to the young kids of some of my friends, hopefully with the goal of sparking a joy and a love of comic books in them, or kindling fueling their current joy of comic books in them, the way that the genre did for me as a kid. We've got two that, because of violence and substance abuse, not being super appropriate for that younger crowd, will be going to the free bin for the enjoyment of the college kids at the school where I work. And we've got two in Firefly and Planet Death that will be having a permanent or semi-permanent place in my personal collection, because I want to see where this one goes, and I want to see if this one hits different once I have once I have a better understanding of those characters. But yeah, that is our first Ollie's 5-pack. I've got at least two more that I've got from from Ollie's that I picked up for various reasons, and so we will take a look at those in a future video. But for right now, I hope you all enjoyed looking through some new issues with me, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one.